Okay, family, we're back. We're here at Battle Rock Beach in Port Orford, Oregon. We've got some fog. Last night we even had a little drizzle at the camp. And we're back out here at Port Orford. Is the only area where we get some internet service. So we come out here to do our research and dig deeper into scriptural evidence of all of these heavenly signs and also into all of these ancient history subjects. And sometimes I have to filter through a lot of information to get to the truth, because as we all know, our modern society has lots of misinformation, and it's important to realize that our modern scholars, for the majority of the subjects, are teaching misinformation. And there's a lot of things that are being discovered in science that are disproving some of the things that we used to believe about about history, especially in Egypt and ancient Babylon. I'm sure there's other places around the world that are having huge discoveries. I've heard about all the American discoveries, which are radically changing history here also, about who was here first and how large the cities were, and what it was like here, a couple thousand years ago. But what we're here to do today is get to the bottom of this dilemma that we have with John the Baptist. We're going to finish up on how John became a Baptist and the transition of that era into what happened at the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, the first thing we have to understand about John the Baptist is, his lineage. And if you haven't done your research, then it's important to go back and do a little bit of homework on John, who John the Baptist is from a scriptural point of view, and how he's connected to Messiah, because that would take a lot of extra time to go through explaining that, and these are things that are connected. So if you don't have a deep understanding of who John the Baptist is, then you should go do a little, even if it's a minor study, do a little bit of research on who John the Baptist is. And from this Essene perspective, John, entered into that alternative priestly order by way of his Nazirite vow. And we all know scripturally that John had taken his Nazirite vow. And we can see that once we can connect that word of Nazirite vow, or a Nazirite, to Nazarenes, then we can understand a little bit more about who these Essenes were. Because as we've said, there were multiple sects within the Essene order. And you have this Nazarene sect that was, for the most part, in eastern and central and southern, what you would call, the land of Israel today. Back then it was different because the southern area was Judah. And this is where we get our Jews today. So when the Jews come back to the modern area and then they call it Israel, there is no Israel there now. And so we misunderstand that. We think the Jews are Israel, but that's not the case. And this is why Messiah said that he came for the lost, the lost house. And that's directly tying to the lost 10 tribes. And John, being, from a Levitical priesthood, his father, you can do your research on John, and once you do, you'll realize, who we're talking about here. He doesn't, in the scriptures, he does not take a traditional role of a Levitical priest. He goes out into the wilderness and he prepares the way for Messiah. And we know that we have historical evidence from many, many different sources of who these people were that were out in the desert or in the wilderness and were doing their work from a natural perspective. We know that they were the Essenes. And we know from historical data who these Essenes were. There's so much research. I've been studying it for over 20 years, and I find so much new stuff almost every single day. So it's a treasure trove of information. Some of it you do have to filter through, because as we'll discuss later in this video or maybe an upcoming video, I don't like to have these videos go too long, so we'll discuss about how there was lots of division at the time of Messiah within these sects. And the sect that John was part of was the Nazarites. So we're going to discuss those individuals and their lifestyle and why John would have come to this question. And so, having been grown up in a Levitical household, John would have been taught from a very specific vantage point. He would have a programmed vision of what the Messiah was going to be from a Pharisaical ideal. And this is where all of these problems arose. Is the society at the time of Christ, and all of the called out ones, or the Essenes, were also in error. They had perfected things to a point, but they had many errors within their doctrine, and Christ came at a perfect time to correct the problems that these sects and these religious orders had. And so it was vital for Messiah to come into this world at that time because of what was happening. So these Nazarites had broken down into multiple different sects within their own order. And this is why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls today. We would not have, or I can't say we wouldn't, but we probably would not have the Dead Sea Scrolls if it was not for these pious ones. They lived in a manner that the majority of society would never have chosen, and so far out there that it was really hard to get to them from the Roman Christian persecution. And they had a way to protect all of these documents, these scrolls, and written pages from all of our ancient history of this order. And again, that information was not available to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Essenes were highly secretive of their documents and also their initiations. And it wasn't until all of these things were found that we could dig into these initiations and what these people within these orders had to go through in order to partake in the group, or the priesthood, because some of them were all priests and scribes who were in the middle of nowhere for a very specific purpose, to not only congregate all of this information and documents. Like I said, all the scrolls and everything were kept in an area where they would be easily protected. And I'm sure that underneath the Vatican there are thousands and thousands and thousands of documents and scrolls that were captured by the Romans and hidden away during the Dark Ages and the attack on this order. And again, for those of you who don't know this history, it sheds light on something that absolutely needs to be known for you to be able to decipher for yourself the truth of history. Because what we understand, especially from an American perspective, is all lies. It's deception. We're being ruled mentally and emotionally and societally by a corrupted understanding of history. And they did this on purpose so that they could use religion to control the masses. And this is why we had so many deaths of this group over that time. And it's why, John the Baptist lost his head, and it's why they attacked anybody within this order, including Messiah and all of the disciples. And so these men were hunted down and killed for a very specific reason. And we're getting to the bottom line of how the Baptist got to this question with Messiah. And this question helps us to determine what was going on at that time. And as we've said before, John would have never questioned Christ, nor would any of his disciples have questioned Christ if they did not have something in their own head or ideal that made them go, uh-oh, something's not right here. And so we have to get to that bottom line in order to truly understand this historical evidence. We're talking about this so that we can walk forward, because without the truth, all we're doing is going in circles. So John, having made this question, would have shown that there was something wrong with the understanding of the modern Jewish nation, and that their idea of Messiah and of what we would call this religion was wrong. And we can even read in the scriptures when we're doing our New Testament studies how during the time of Messiah, how everything that these disciples thought was wrong. And Christ did nothing but speak in parables to the people, because they were blind and they did not have any understanding of the truth. And it's the same today. We have people who think they know, and the only thing that they know is lies. And they've accepted these lies because that's all they know. And they're going to beat their chests, and they're going to beat the table until they're dead, because they believe that that's what they're supposed to do, is defend the truth. But their truth, if your truth is based on lies, then your house of cards is going to fall. And sooner or later, it's going to be proven out, and it will be difficult for you to be able to decipher where the mistakes were made. And this is where this discussion leads, is that John the Baptist was having questions about the interior workings of the order. And as a priest, it would have been his job to make sure that all of his followers moved forward with Messiah, and that John was handing the torch over to the right man. If they're both running the race, he needs to make sure he hands the wand over to the next runner that's on his team. And then, it would be up to Christ to run with that from that point forward, because John knew that that's what his purpose was, that he was the forerunner. And so this is where these questions would have come in. And we also find that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and even many of the people in the land of Israel were mumbling to themselves about Christ and what he was doing with his choice of his inner team, his disciples. We're talking about Christ having fishermen and tax collectors, and if you haven't seen the series The Chosen, then I suggest that you look on, I believe you might be able to find it on YouTube, but look up season 1. I think season 2 is either just started or maybe over already. I'm not sure, but I heard that season 2 was going. But I would suggest watching that series. They don't make it 100% correct, because they're, as with all of us, we can only have as much information as we've gathered, and unfortunately the majority of us, the information we're gathering is from a Roman Christian perspective. It's not from an ancient perspective of who Messiah was. It's from a Roman perspective, and we've got to come to grasp with who this Roman beast is, because it's in the book of Daniel. It's all over. It's all through the scriptures. We can see it all through the New Testament and connecting to Daniel and Revelation. So it's not a question. The problem is in our understanding of what that information is. We're pointing our fingers at Catholicism, and unfortunately, Catholicism only points to the entirety of Christianity. So you can't differentiate just because you think your church or your group or your type of Christianity is different than Catholicism. Even Martin Luther himself, the one who created the Protestant movement, wrote in his own memoirs. You can get his books, you can read the information. He called the Catholic Church the Mother Church. So please, you have to understand history. You've got to be able to grasp what Christianity is. We're talking about the beast religion. Christianity is the beast religion. You have to grasp that. You will not be able to understand prophetic things on a deep level unless you get this understanding. And this is how most of us are deceived, is because we're part of the beast system and we can't see it. There's billions and billions of people who profess Christianity on this planet today, and it does not equate to anything that Christ said, or that were prophesied, or that were made known by the disciples and the apostles. It does not equate at all. We're looking at something that's wrong. And in order to get to the bottom of what's wrong, we have to know what's right. And the only way to get to the correct truth is by research. You've got to have the time, and you've got to be willing to take the time to do the research. And most of us are in a state where we're in Babylon deep, and we spend the majority of our time in either entertainment or doing things that we like, and we work to be entertained, and we spend our money and our time in entertainment. This is the American way, and it's the exact same MO of Rome, and it's what led to their fall, and it's what's leading to our destruction. Is we as a society don't take our time to educate ourselves. We believe the bullpucky. We are bamboozled. We are sucker punched. We are literally tricked in every single way, and the majority of the Americans lap it up. They love their lies, and they will defend them to their death, and their ideals will cause them to defend their understanding to the destruction of others. This is why we find so many religious wars and so many deaths under this thing called Christianity. It doesn't align with the words of Messiah at all. But this order of Nazarenes, which Messiah also came through or out of, had its own problems. And that's why John the Baptist had these extreme questions of who Messiah was going to be. And when Christ didn't fit his understanding, then he and his disciples had to get to the bottom. And this is where we see the two disciples of John being sent to Christ to ask him if he was the one expected. And we can do our word searches on that scripture, and it will really give you a deeper understanding of the words chosen and used for that scripture. I would suggest doing that also. If you have the time, do a word study on that scripture, and do a deeper study on, like I said, John the Baptist and who he was, because it'll help you grasp all these things that we have in history that are vital to understand, to follow through with the correct way that this faith works, because the church has corrupted the majority of our understandings, and the Protestant movement hasn't done much more to rectify the problems than the Catholic Church. And we have to get to the bottom of where the problems were. And this is how we do it, by way of this question that John has. We have to understand that there was something wrong. That there, it was either that Christ was not who he said he was, and these men had to make a decision to let their followers know that Christ was a deceiver, or he was incorrect, or he was a false Messiah. They had to be willing to make sure that they were not, as priests, following somebody corrupt. And you would also have to have known the history of how multiple other so-called messiahs had already come before Christ. And this is easily proven in history. You can look up Bar Kokhba and many other so-called messiahs. Even the Hanukkah story. There were many in society who were calling, that family was supposed to, the Messiah was going to come out of that family that did that, because they were priests. And that's ultimately where the priesthood had gone, is in that way. And that's why Christ didn't come through that order, and neither did John, even though he was legally able to be a Levitical priest. He did not choose that way. He went into the Essene order, and that's why he had his Nazirite vow done. And we can see the connection of Nazirite and Nazarene. And a lot of people think the word Nazarene is tied to Nazareth, but this is not correct. There was no Nazareth at the time of Messiah. Absolutely, historically proven. Please do your research. Again, we are lied to. We promote things that we believe because we believe that it's truth. But if it's false evidence, then it has to be thrown out in the court of truth. If it's false evidence, we must discard it. No different than any other court. And it's our job to make sure that we are following the truth, and so that means we have to prove it out. We have to be willing to prove it out. And my challenge to every one of my subscribers and everyone watching these videos is to do your homework and prove it out